Now, thank you for joining us for the Recollection Lecture. The Recollection series is something that goes on each term at Pusey House with between 6 and 10 recollection lectures, and they're meant to recall us to, as a sort of ressourcement to the great persons and the great ideas of what we refer to as Christian history. And so it's broad, and we ask people to go deep. We have a public lecture, typically like this, or a set of public lectures that are sometimes attached to a colloquium, and that are meant to be the open public face of something which is not always able to be a public colloquium, not only because space and size, but also because sometimes the kind of depth or expertise that one would need to attend the colloquium doesn't admit of greater participation, but these lectures are meant to, for general audiences. So we've invited two persons that I had the pleasure to meet in Rotterdam when I was a guest of Professor Klamer at conferences he did when he was the professor of cultural economics there at Erasmus University, and put on these big public-facing colloquia with major thinkers and also people like me who could attend and who could deal with questions of morality in economics. And as part of that larger project, I had the pleasure in 2020 of meeting Luigino Bruni, who is at LUMSA in Rome, and alongside colleagues there, he's been instrumental in the rediscovery of the Italian tradition of civil economy, and he's co-founded there the School of Civil Economy. And that's been sort of to re-envision economic exchange through society, I'm misreading, sociality. Yeah, good Latinate root, great. Sociality, perfect. Relational goods and the common good. And it's a pity he can't be here in person with us. He's going to come to us through recording and then enter for the Q&A, because he really is that uomo universale, the sort of the Italian professor who loves to talk, who knows many things, and who will sit with you with wine into the evening and go through the history of ideas. And he also has a love for the church and for religious things. And so if you do get to meet him in person, send our best and enjoy a glass of wine and a good conversation with him. And with that being said, he's now going to deliver lectures that he's pre-recorded on the question of Jesus as the good money changer, or as he's put it, Jesus as the good money changer without a question mark.
Good morning to everyone. Many greetings from Florence, Locchiano, where I'm living in this School of Civil Economy, where I have my office. I'm very happy to give this contribution to this meeting on money, the meaning of money. Unfortunately, in this moment of the semester, for me, it's impossible to be there because I'm teaching very hard. And then I'm here, I participate just online. Thank you for the invitation. Okay, this issue is very interesting from my perspective, because in the last few years, more than 10 years, I'm an economist by training. My research was before based basically on economics and philosophy, history of economic ideas. But in the last few years, I'm also entering more and more into the religions, in particular the biblical studies. I also published a few books on that and papers. And then this issue of money between religion, economics, economy, history is actually very close to what I'm doing now. Then just a few ideas in these 20 minutes I would like to share with you in this workshop. As we know, in the Bible, the Old and New Testament, there is a deep interaction and overlapping between the economy, language, economic, some symbols, economic codes, and religions, spirituality, God, and so and so. Because economic is one of the language of the Bible. We find a lot of economy in the several books of the Old and New Testament, because the Bible is very much interested to what happen in life, in concrete life of people, the people of Israel and the people in general, and then it's impossible to understand what life is without entering into economic dimension. Today is impossible for sure, but also in the past it was very difficult in the pre-modern, in the ancient world to imagine something about community, something about life, justice, law, without entering into contract, into exchanges, into work, into goods, commodities, and of course money. Then the Bible is full of money, it's full of coins, it's full of contract. In particular, in the book of Genesis, there are very essential contracts between Abraham and the Hittites, I don't know how to pronounce in English, but this population in the Lebanon, the contemporary Lebanon, for buying the land for the tomb, the grave of Sarah, Machpelah, is very nice, very old exchange about money. When we find immediately one element interesting in the money in the Old Testament, that there is a sort of, how do you say, understatement, sort of attitude of talking about money just about, because it's not good, it's not proper to talk too much about prices, about money. Then in this dialogue between Abraham and the Hittites, of course, you find we can give for free the land, but Abraham, no, we have to pay. You know? Then the price arises for only at the end, 400 shekels, as a sort of secondary element. But at the same time, you find in this contract, also in the contract of Jeremiah, when he born in chapter 32 of Jeremiah, the land in Anatot, before the exile to Babylon, the importance of contract and money when there are important, essential, crucial things are involved. In order to buy this land, in this so crucial moment of history of Israel, the exile to Babylon, Nabucodonosor, so that was a very important religious act. Everybody was selling, Jeremiah was buying. Sort of why? Because we will come back from the exile. It was a very important. But in that moment, the contract is more efficient, is more effective than gift. Then in this chapter 32, the price mentioned 70 silver shekel, and there are also people who witness these events with also testimonies. There is a lot of formal moment to make very solemn this moment, because contract, money are also a language of important things. Then contract is better than gift in this moment. It's something that seems so different from the Christian approach to gift, to grace and money, but that is also one underlying trait in the Old Testament. Then the price is a bit embarrassing. You cannot mention too explicitly, but at the same time, contract, money, explicit money are necessary for crucial moments of life, like a tomb of a wife, like a sign of prophecy for to say that we will be back from the exile. And then at the same time, the money, the presence of the economic language in the Bible was also a problem, because in my opinion, there is too much money in the Bible. What does it mean there is too much money? Which is the criterion for is it too much or too little? because being so strong, so clear, so easy, the money language for the people, even children, when they are 4 or 5, they understand the difference between paper money, coins. Then everybody, even people, analphabet people, will understand the meaning and the sense of money. Then the Bible is full of money. It's also full of the economic and monetary reasoning. The first Homo economicus has been the Homo biblicus, the Homo religiosus, before the Bible even. Because the first stock exchange in history of humanity has been the altar, the temple, the sanctuary, the places of sacrifices with God. Then there is the huge issue, there is no time now for going deeper, the old issue of the meaning of sacrifices in the Bible, in the other religions before the Bible, in the Middle East, the whole Sumeric population, and then so and so up to the Bible. Then the language for dialogue, for try to talk, to speak with God, has been the sacrifice. That was a sort of currency, was a money for a sort of commerce, dialogue, interchange with God. Then the Latin word pecunia, that means money in Latin, pecuniary, as we know, externalities. This word of pecunia seems to come from exactly pecus, that is sheep in Latin. The lambs. That was the number of lambs you offer to the altar, to God. Pecunia comes from that, not from the other possible but imaginary origins. Because the first, probably one of the first, probably they developed together the first ferry, the first market, and the first religions. There was sort of interaction of these two dimensions, but actually one of the first places for an accounting, for imagining a sort of double budget, double accountability between God and man was the altar, was the temple. I offer. There is this famous in the Upanishad, Indian sacred book. This is my offer. Where are your grace? Addresses to God. Then, in a very uncertain world, the sacrifice, the offer of very precious commodities, goods like animals, but also children, unfortunately. We know that in the Canaan, in the Palestine region, there was also this kind of sacrifice, human sacrifice. That was the language to communicate with God. And then that was so important that even in the New Testament, we still have this idea of commercial religion, retributive theology. Then the idea there is a sort of accountability, even across generations. Think about the blind men in the Gospel of John, who are the sinners in this family for this disease. No? The idea that there should be a sort of balance between my sins, my guilt, and my conditions in life, all the sins of my parents, up to the 4th generation, as we know in the Leviticus. No? And then this economic approach was so deep-rooted in the biblical humanism. Then Jesus was very much against that because it was very deep-rooted. It's not by chance that we find in the book of John the first public event of Jesus after the weddings of Cana, that was inside, was indoor. That was outdoor was the expulsion of merchants from the temple in Jerusalem. It was not a matter of to be against merchants, to be against money changers. No, was much more, was against the economic religion, the idea that the idea of sacrifice, the idea that God is a sort of a counter with two books, the books of merits and the books of guilties, and then we have to reduce or increase our debts, our credits towards the divinity. That was so present in the Old Testament, and unfortunately also in the Christianity, because even though Jesus was very much against that, if you look at this episode of chapter 2 of John, this expulsion of merchants from the temple of Jerusalem, and this sort of quite almost violent reaction of Jesus against that, was actually, you have transformed the house of my father into a cave of thieves. This the idea, not because the cave was a sort of image of the idea of religion, not just the profession of money changers, because it was much more. Was the idea God is love, God is grace. We don't need this turpe commercium with the divinity. God does works as we imagined in the past. God is not an accounter. God is another way of imagining the religion. That was very, very important. But unfortunately, this episode of the merchants in John 2, together with Matthew 25, the parable of talents, has been the two most manipulated episodes in the New Testament, although in the opposite ways, because there was used the parable of talents for justifying the economic entrepreneurship, to justify the sort of ethics of risk, the ethics of entrepreneurship, whereas the chapter 2 of merchants in the temple was a sort of justification much more important in the Middle Age against merchant, also because also in John, in chapter 13, we find the only gospel when Judah was also the economist, the economist of the community of 12. With as we know in many paintings in the Middle Age, then Judah was the economist, the economist of the community. The merchant were expelled from the temple. That was the justification in the Middle Age of the very bad reputation, very bad press of people working with money. There are sort of pseudo gospel of Matthew that was very influential in the Middle Age of the 16th century, where there was this kind of sentence. Then the apostles, Peter, the other, when sometimes came back to their original profession as fishers, but Matthew, it was dealing with money, as we know, St. Matthew, was for him was impossible to go back, because any profession, any Christian working with money has to leave, has to quit. his profession because it's not compatible with gospel. Then to use money to have a profession that deals with money was considered to be against the gospel. And then, as we know, the people working as a merchant, running shops, cannot be in Italy, in Italian cities, cannot be part of municipality government because it was considered sort of un-Christian job, because this kind of job was considered as Judah. There is a beautiful book of Giacomo Todeschini called in Italian Come Giuda, like Judah. There is the history of the negative attitudes toward commerce, money lending, banks, usually, of course, in the Middle Age, with the idea that any kind of job dealing with money was like Judah. And that is also intertwined in the Middle Age with the legend of Jewish finance that was so important for, as we know, Nazi and fascism in the 20th century, also before. The idea that all the European finance was in the hands of Jewish people, that was totally a legend, because most of the finance in Italy, in France, was in the hands of Christians. Think about the bankers of the popes, Chigi, Borghese, Medici. They were totally Christians, but they were totally bankers. And then the idea that dealing with money is something that is improper. But that the final question that I have no time for enter into the details is how it was possible that with these all negative attitudes towards money, many finance, banks, that capitalism was born in Europe, in the Christian Europe. And not just with the Protestant Europe, because as we know, a sort of capitalism was born before Martin Luther, John Calvin. In Italy, in Florence, in France, in Germany, there was a lot of proto-capitalism in the 13th, 14th century, as we know also for the work of Amintore Fanfani and other people, about the Catholic spirit of capitalism. But how it was possible that with this so negative approach in the Christians, that even in Jesus, that Jesus was the very, very explicit to call mammon money. Mammon was Cananea divinity that was a sort of another god. Then it's Jesus that gives the dignity of God to money. You cannot serve two gods, God and money. And also with this huge criticism towards rich people in the Luke. Blessed are the poor, but also there's so negative words about rich people. There are in many gospels this idea of the young rich that that is impossible for a rich to enter into. It's very difficult for the rich to enter into the kingdom of heaven. No? But that is the issue. But why? My answer to that is that the basic structure, the anthropological, social, relational, spiritual structure of the Jewish and Christian world, the biblical humanism, all the New Testament, is very based on this idea on this commercial idea of religion. That was this idea that we deal with God by measuring, by an idea of accounting, by an idea of compensation. It was much more deeper than the condemnation of theologians, the condemnation of priests. bishops and popes, because people think about the whole huge mechanism of the economization, financialization of grace, the indulgences, as we know from Martin Luther, that was much more than indulgences in terms of jubilee. That was just one aspect, but was the transformation of many religious, almost all religious practices into a monetary equivalent. If you receive a penitence from a confession, you can transform a sort of derivative bond. You can transform that in money. You can pay for that. Or maybe you can pay a poor people if the penitence was a pelerinage to Santiago de Compostela, but you are very busy, or you won't do that. You can pay a poor for doing that for you. There was a monetization of everything, even penitence like to say a long number of thousands of Pater Noster. If you were enough rich, you can pay a poor for praying for you. Then the monetization of everything. Then the spirit of capitalism was much more deep and rooted than what is in the treatise of theologians against usury, against interest rate, against profit. That was written in Latin. Normal people, 99% of European people didn't know Latin. But the idea you have to pay for a grace, that nothing is for free in religion. If you don't pay for Mass, the Mass is not valid. If you don't pay the priest, what he prays is not effective, so and so. Then we don't understand, in particular, the Catholic cultures in Italy, in Spain, in the South America, without this interaction between money, economy, and religion. This idea that God is not actually a matter of grace, but is a matter of merit. It's a matter of you have to deserve your salvation. This idea that we are saved by grace is not there. It's very much intertwined with the economic culture. I just wrote a book in Italian, the economy of counter-reformation, the effect of the Catholic theology and religion on the economic, some very important economic issues in Italy and in the Catholic countries. Then about money changers, there is a logion, probably an original logion of Jesus, but that is not is not reported in the New Testament. That Origene, in Origene commentary to John, we have this tradition. Then, according to this logion, this word, this sentence of Jesus, Jesus said about the coins that was offered in the temple, that Jesus said, be skilled money changers in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Be skilled money changers. Then these metaphors, economic, financial metaphors, was so important in the Old and New Testament. The Bible is full of monies. There was a reaction toward that by Jesus, but it was not enough, because in spite of Jesus' words, this economic religion, this retributive theology was so important in Europe during the Middle Age, even much even more later with the Counter-Reformation in the Latin countries, that you cannot understand the economic culture, contemporary economic culture, without taking seriously theology and religion. But that will be the content of our next seminar. That will be interesting, the effect of theology in economic and social life in different countries. That would be maybe a suggestion. Thank you very much.
Professor Bruni unfortunately can't yet hear your applause, but he will join us at the next hour, or just after the next hour, after we hear from Professor Arjo Klamer, whom I want to introduce now. Professor Klamer, professor is before his name. He's emeritus now from the Erasmus University Rotterdam, but he's now at the Vrije Universiteit van Amsterdam, so the Free University of Amsterdam, which is something that Abraham Kuyper and others were formative in founding as a Christian confessional university originally that wasn't tied to state churches and that had liberty then to do its own thing in the way that private universities in other parts of the world did. And so it had a very different character, and still to this day I think attracts people who have a different way of doing academics or being scholars than what is most common in the contemporary university, at least the universities of the continent. He's a professor. Also, I don't know if your website still has it, Professor Klamer. I can't see if you're with us. Where I don't know if it has, but I think you're also a bit of a preacher sometimes. Is that right? Yeah. You're in the Remonstrant communities in the Netherlands, the Arminians. Yeah. There's some of his sermons are available in Dutch on his website. But also a politician for a time, active in politics locally in his city, and still, you might tell us how you're active in politics now. It says in your bio that you're currently politically active. Because are you still in the city council of? Okay, so but also politically active. So professor, preacher, and politician. And what tends to tie this all together, I think, is asking about what we care about most and what our deep loves are, almost in an Augustinian sense, and chasing that down within scholarship, within preaching, and within politics. So with that said, let me invite Professor Klamer to speak to us about the limited role and the problematic meaning of money in human economies. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. What I would like to do is to use this 30 minutes to see whether I can offer another perspective. And the objective is to show you that there are what I call human economies that are, in all kinds of respects, are far more important than the economy that we usually talk about and also have talked about so far in this symposium. The economy that we usually talk about, and I'm an economist, so I also dedicate a great deal of my life to study that economy, is what you could call the financial, the monetary economy, and that's the economy in which money figures prominently. What I see, and that's already we saw in talks for what Edward shared with it, but also what Bruni just did, is that there is a great deal of discomfort about the role of money and what it does in our lives. So what you see is a lot of attempts, and we have seen already a few of those, to ameliorate this sort of sharp edges of the fiscal monetary economy. So what we do is we add a psychological, social phase to what in neoclassical economics is the calculating individual. So we equip and think that people have emotions, cognitive limitations. Or what we do is we add a social phase to it, to say there's also a society that functions and that we should pay attention to. Or, as my dear friend Deirdre McCloskey is doing, is to add a moral or cultural phase to the financial monetary economy. And to say that also people operating markets have virtues, operate according to certain values, that is a moral side to it. The approach that I want to share with you is radically different from all this. And to motivate that and to understand myself, because I've gone through quite a process, it may help to understand that I am the son of a minister, a Protestant minister. So I was born in the church, you could say. I grew up in a life of faith, becoming a very strong believer till around the age of 14, when I became skeptical and realized that there was also another side of my family, my mother's side of the family, where with a grandfather who actually was very good with money, made a lot of it, and for some reason or another that I quite don't understand myself, I switched my faith in God to a fascination with money. I got fascinated with money. I was curious about it. I wanted to understand it. And so when time came to choose a study, I switched the world of the sacred that I grew up with through my father to the world of the profane, the world of money. I went to work for a bank. My master's thesis was about it. My PhD thesis was about it. I wrote a book about money. I became a prominent sort of skeptic of the euro in my own country. But then things began to unravel, because I engaged in conversation with artists. My wife is a therapist, which is a quite different world either. And of course, I was reminded of my father's life, way of thinking. He had died in the meantime. And my father had no understanding and no conception of money. It didn't sort of got into his brains. He only had, if he had a view, it was a negative one. And I found that artists also were very ambivalent about it, and were very dismissive if I brought my economic message to them. Not to speak of therapists like my wife, who is also very skeptical of the whole issue and also doesn't have much mental space for dealing with money. So, as Jonathan already mentioned, I circle around and come back to where I was. So slowly but surely getting back into the life of faith, finding myself preaching so now and then, which I learned, of course, from my father, and trying to reconcile. And that has changed and created a completely different perspective. Let me illustrate that. On Monday, 2 days ago, I had my first grandfather day. My daughter has a little boy, 3 months old now, and I promised to her that I would take care of him 1 day a week. So I spent from 9 to 5 with this little boy, finding out that it's pretty hard work, pretty exhaustive actually, rather skilled work. I mean, this little cry, what does it mean? Does he want to eat? Does he want to give a burp? Is there something else bothering him? A lot of work. And I'm holding him, and I told him, listen, his name is Friso. I do all this for you, but you don't have to pay for this. It's not costing you any. I do that for free. Of course, he had no clue. In the meantime, my daughter feels somewhat uncomfortable because she knows my opportunity cost, and she knows that I have to give up all kinds of things. So, and I said, listen, I gladly do this. I like to be a good grandfather to my grandchild. What I illustrate here is one aspect of the human economy. And the most dominant and most important human economy of all, and that's the oikonomia, the economy of the household. That is an economy. It's an economy that we spend most of our life in. My guess is sort of 60% for most of us. Some people spend 100% of their life in the oikonomia. And there's an economy completely different from the one that we have been talking about. But it's still the base. It's also a very strange economy. When my students taking Econ 101, which I taught for, I don't know, 30 years, I tell them quickly about that we are individuals having to make choices, refer to Robinson Crusoe, Homo economicus, right? You remember the man stranded on an island, dealing with scarcity, having wants, rational choice. They immediately go for it, and then they really jump on the bandwagon when I introduce demand, supply, and they're sold. Die heeft daar 18 euros. What we completely bypass is their life up till then had nothing to do with all that. Up till then, they were the beneficiaries of usually two people working incredibly hard to give them everything they need, without, mind you, them paying for that. In the meantime, the parents run a taxi business, a daycare center, a hotel, a restaurant, a cleaning service, a tour operator. They do all kinds of tasks that other people get paid for, and they do it free. That's standard. Everyone does that. It's an economy that has little to do with money, but has a lot to do about relationships. It's all about the value of care, taking responsibility. At least that is what we are learning in an economy like that. That means that money, I don't know about your household, but money, if it plays any role, it is a subsidiary one. And it's also interesting how it works in the economia, but it's clearly different from the way it does in the financial economy. Money is subsidiary, if anything. I call this a human economy because it's an economy about relationships. It's an economy that is dedicated to the good life. What you are writing about is how, and it is to a great extent that you and I realize a good life in that setting. At least I do, and probably many of you do so too. This is one human economy. There are some others that I want to mention. If you go out of your home, you enter the social world. You go on the street, you go to the schoolyard, you go to the church, you join a club, you go and play music with people. That's what I call the social economy. It's the economy of community, the economy of relationships. It's, again, requiring work, requiring effort. What is the characteristic of economy? It's a practice, all kinds of practices, like going to church and being active in the church, volunteering in your soccer club or whatever. The way you participate, and a critical term in these economies, the way you contribute. Most of all the interactions in the social economy, again, take place without money playing a major or necessarily a dominant role, if that. But the economy, then there is, let me mention the natural economy. That's the economy, the way we relate to nature. That's a rather exploitative economy right now. We exploit nature. We try to change the relationship to nature. But I actually want to highlight two other human economies. And there's one economy that usually is overlooked. At least I hardly ever see any mentioning of it, whereas we are in the midst of it. And that's what I call the culture economy. It's the economy of sense-making. That's the economy in which you and I participate in right now. I am doing the talking at this moment, you are doing the listening, but that's characteristic of what we do. We read, we write, we watch, we engage in all kinds of practices in order to make sense of the world. We go to church, we practice an art, we do politics, we do whatever in order to make sense of this world. We gossip, we chat, we go to cafes, all to in some way or another participate and contribute to what you could call the cultural economy. Also interesting, because money does play a role in that economy. The major companies, Facebook, Google, are actually dedicated to the cultural economy. Think of the whole media industry is dedicated to that economy, so money plays a role there. But notice the way we interact. It's not that I pay you for listening to me, which I appreciate very much, by the way, that you do, but you're not expecting me to pay you for doing so. And neither you are paying me if you find an idea interesting that I present. We don't do that. And so the cultural economy also takes place without always having money playing a role. And finally, there is maybe for us the central economy, and that's the personal economy. That's the economy that you and I, every person, engages in to make a life. Everyone faces the challenge to make something of their life. And that requires a lot of skill to figure out what is the right thing to do, what are your right values, what are the right virtues, which practice you want to engage in to make and realize a good life. The personal economy is all about care, or what is also considered, Aristotle called it, but it's in the Bible also said, self-love. Love thy neighbor like thyself, but it's about loving thyself. If you love thyself, I'm wondering whether when you are seeking, when you are inquisitive, when you are avarice, greedy, whether you do yourself a service. I wonder, and we find out when people are at the end of their life and look back at their life, then they usually find that the most important things in their life was their contributions to the human economies. Hardly ever, and in my experience never, people will be proud of what they did in the fiscal monetary economies. It's the human economies that we realize a good life. So if you switch that perspective and put the human economies in the center, then you realize that the fiscal monetary economies disappear in the background. And the function of the monetary fiscal economies, I don't disparage them, I don't say they should be, we should forget about them, no, not, of course not, but they are instrumental only for the sake of a good life that we realize in the human economies. So we turn it around. To illustrate, go back to the story of Robinson Crusoe. I don't know whether you ever read the book. I actually did. And to find out that Robinson Crusoe is not the story that the economists make of it. It's actually also very weird that Homo economicus is operating in a world without money, because there are no markets, because there are no other people to exchange with. He's living all by himself. But what is Robinson Crusoe's life about? He's seeking a good life, and his most important challenges are, he realizes when he is landed there on the island, is to recover a relationship with father, from whom he was estranged, but most important, to reestablish a relationship with God the Father. So in a scarce time, no economist pays attention, in a scarce time he starts reading the Bible and takes time to pray. So apparently, then you would say he participated in what I call the cultural economy, trying to realize religious values in his life. Later, when he gets rescued, by the way, he starts a family and shares the money that in the meantime earned in his plantation with the guy who had run the plantation, and with the captain of the ship that suffers, or the family of the captain that suffers shipwreck. He became a good man, thanks to his sort of reading of the Bible and becoming a pious man. So my point is that if we focus on the human economies, we sort of start changing our idea of what money does. And the question is, you are going to address it in your talk, asking the question what money is good for. I'm curious what you answered. I'm pointing here at Robert Skidelsky, with whom I started the conversation a long time ago. I'm glad to continue it. That actually the main question is how we realize a good life in these various human economies. Because in the fiscal economy, we cannot realize a good life. In the fiscal economy, in the financial economy, in the monetary economy, we realize only the means to a good life. We buy the stuff or the services that help us to realize a good life. But not a good life itself. That we need human economies for. So it changes your idea about richness and poverty. For example, richness is not necessarily a matter of having lots of money, and poverty is not necessarily having very little money. That could be so, but richness and poverty have more to do whether you have the relational goods that you acquire in the human economies. When I was a governor, I dealt a lot with homeless people. That was also my responsibility for the program to support homeless people. So I had a chance to talk quite a bit with them. And whereas my civil servants were used to ask homeless people, what do you want? Well, they wanted to have drugs and booze, and that's what they want. I suggested, and I asked them, not also what they need, because that was the same, but what is important to you. The question, and that's the question that you ask in the human economies. What is important to you? And then always, invariably, it was something like a home, a sense of belonging. That was important to them because, and also, and that always moved me when they expressed that they want to be signify something to other people. They wanted to be meaningful to other people. Again, something you can only realize in one of the human economies. So, if I go back to my father, and having learned this and discovered that, changing my perspective quite radically, putting the human economy at the center, I think he would recognize that. But how to confront, and Bruni in a way also already dealt with that, his negative, mainly negative perception of money. And that's because I think his main conception, and that's true for many of the artists I was dealing with and the therapists, and indeed when I converse with theologians, I get the same, and a great suspicion of the financial monetary economies and the way that functions. And that's what I want to bring in, because that's what you see in the human economies, that if you use money well, it also can serve a good. And we heard already several examples. When I give money to my daughter, who was desperate for better housing, that is warm money. Money that is given out of care. I could consider that good money. It serves a good. When we collect money from each other and distribute that through the government to do all kinds of things that you could call lukewarm money. In contrast to cold money, which is mainly money that also I spend for my own personal gain. That's the calculation that I make and what I teach. So there's warm money, there's lukewarm money, and cold money. And you can ask yourself, for yourself, and that is relevant to your personal economy, how you deal with that. Edward said the main purpose of money is to give it away, which I increasingly come to that insight myself. Getting older, it doesn't make sense to accumulate money, it makes more sense to give it away. whenever you can. But we're standing here in a chapel, but I also would like to sort of understand the spirit and how that spirit sort of influenced the way we experience money. I did a whole project with bankers and about their ideals. And the prevalent perspective is that they made a lot of money and that they earned it. But a few are coming to the insight that that might not be the right way to experience that. Because what if you experience money as a gift, as a sign of God's grace? Then it gets a sacred dimension. And then you also treat it very differently. Because if you understand that it was given to you, then also you understand that the purpose of that money is not to spend it in only some luxury items that serve yourself, that you better figure out the way you can give it back to where it is really needed, that you can contribute to one or other of the human economies, to support them, to strengthen human communities, to strengthen religions, to strengthen home lives, all kinds of ways that do some good. So changing the meaning of money and putting it in light of the human economies, I think, will also change your attitude and that, I think, gives also a positive answer to what will come out of it. So I do think then it will change your world. Maybe not the entire world, but let's not be sort of too grandiose in thinking that we are here to change the world. But what we can do is change our own world. Change our personal economies, becoming aware of what that means to us, share that with others, and who knows, that will have a ripple effect, you never can tell. But it starts with changing your perspective. And that's, now I'm a preacher, I think we will do well to put the human economies in the foreground of our perception of the world and put the financial and monetary economies in the background and put it in the place where it belongs, in a subsidiary, subservient position to serve us. And that's just as John Maynard Keynes imagined, that we economists would be like dentists dealing with the sort of irrelevant things of life, while you and I can focus on the really important things of life. That's the message.
We'll try to get Professor Bruni on the line. But we can begin Q&A now with Professor Klamer. We have roving mics coming. We'll come to you first. And I saw a hand just behind you for a second. Could we get a roving mic up here? Thanks, Father Parker. This gentleman here in the third row. Introduce yourself if you would. Thanks.
Is it on? Is it on?
Yes, it's on. It's on.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank you. My name is Lyndon West. I'm a professor. I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, and I'm a kind of seeker in the sense that I think was lying behind what you said. It felt to me like, going back to the analogy of Christ in the temple, it felt you were clearing a lot of stuff for me. I mean, I had no idea theologically whether Christ was occupied with this, but the sense of just clearing a lot of stuff out of the way and getting maybe to something more important in terms of our humanity, our relationships, not least our relationships within nature. I'm also aware, thinking maybe theologically, certainly humanly, that the idea of the baby is pretty fundamental in Christianity, and what the baby draws out in us. And I couldn't help but be moved, therefore, by your interaction with the baby. And if we just pause for a moment and think about the beauty and the magic, I've no idea whether it happened in your case. I've got more grandchildren than you. I've got 6 grandchildren. But I know sometimes I feel a kind of, there's a lovely book by someone called Matthew Standen, or What Mothers Do When They're Apparently Doing Nothing. And there's so much magic going on, you know, how you translate from a baby who is upset and crying and distressed, and the mimetic quality between the mother and the baby that gradually can move into a situation where there's a shared joy between them, and how those processes can best be understood. Now, how that relates to the world of economics, I don't know. But I think what you've done is to switch it round and put the important things first, and then we'll have the discussion about economics. Thank you.
Well, I think that's it. You sort of, it's indeed a little bit like what Jesus tried to do in the temple, chasing away the money changers to reorient us to what's really important. And that's why I brought in this image of my carrying my grandson. To me, that's incredibly important, right? And that weighs up in terms of values against a lot of other things. That certainly also the things that I have been talking about as a sort of standard economist. Yeah,
what I was also thinking, and maybe it's something to do with economics as well, was that the French philosopher Hélène Cixous talks about the idea of the gift in terms of human flourishing, not capital like Pierre Bourdieu, but the gift, and the gift that is actually fundamental in human flourishing, but again isn't noticed very much. I don't know whether you do have conversations with your wife. Maybe as a therapist she thinks a little bit about the gift as well. Is that familiar to you, the idea of the gift? And could you say a little bit about it if it is?
Yeah, I wrote quite a bit about gifts. The importance of gifts is, and different from an exchange, is that there are no terms of trade. You never determine in advance what you get in return. And sometimes you don't get anything in return. And the way it happens, that can go in sort of a very indirect way. I mean, of course, Maus but a lot of people wrote about that. But gifts are the way you realize relationships. Friendships are based on it. You gift is like your contribution. I like the term contribution, actually. What kind of contribution you make. I mean, you make now a contribution by asking a question that adds to this session. It's a sort of gift, but it's also a contribution to realize this intellectual practice that we are engaging in right now. It's not that necessarily something comes in return. I might be grateful, I may, but that is also not why you're doing it, because we increasingly come to recognize in the human economies is I care for my grandson, which is a gift, but what I get in return is being I hope to be a good grandfather, which is important to me. And what I hope I get in return is a good family that also is important to me. So I participate, make good in a way what I may not have done so much when I was teaching and doing research, that now I'm sort of finding more what is really important to me. And so I contribute. I see it as a contribution indeed. And I don't want to get paid for that. My daughter doesn't even have to say thank you. I like to do it. I want to do it because it's important to me. And that's the critical question. It's important for me to do so. And that's the way I operate, and I think you too, in human economies. It's not out of gain. It's not out of because you have these endless wants that you want to satisfy. We want to do good. We want to do the right thing. And there's no person I run into who doesn't want to. I still have to run into a person who will say, I'm greedy and I'm happy about that. I don't run into these people. No, it's not good.
Thanks. Professor Klamer, there's so much to agree with what you said that, forgive me for pressing you on one matter. I totally agree with the idea of reversing the primacy of what you call the human economy and the financial economy. That makes so much Christian sense to me. But I do wonder if you're using the word economy in a number of different senses and stretching them all together. So it seems to me a lot of the time you're using the word economy to mean a human group, and you mean a family, or your relationship with your daughter, or a relationship with a baby, and that's I guess, drawing on the idea of the economy as being a household concept. But there is a kind of economy which asks a lot of questions of me as a Christian, and it's not simply the case that if I reverse the primacy of the human economy and this economy, it sort of disappears in the background and becomes instrumental and becomes unproblematic. And that's the economy which is a very, very large trading nexus, so large that you don't know the people you're dealing with, so large that Hayek actually didn't want to call it an economy, he called it a catalaxy, because he said there was no sense in which it was a household that was being managed. It was a kind of thing that didn't have rules except a spontaneous order that Lord Griffiths referred to. And that kind of economy is real. It's different to the close family relationships that you were talking about. And it does tax me as a Christian to know how to deal with that economy, how to love people at a distance, if I can put it that way. Just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that.
An article on this whole issue. I'm curious what Luigino thinks about that. My battle is to expand the notion of the economy in such a way that the standard economists cannot claim it as their domain only. For me, an economy is any activity that you and I engage in to realize something of value. Right? So I would call this, what we are doing right now, an economic activity. We are doing work, you in particular, because you try to make sense of what I'm saying. That's work. There's an effort. You spend time. There are opportunity costs involved. We engage in something that's relevant for us, because otherwise we wouldn't do it. We realize maybe some insights, some ideas, which are important to me and you, and that's an economy. For Mises, famously in the sort of around the turn of the century, people try to conceptualize what the economy is like, and he actually considered the notion of the good. What is a good? And he said, should friendship count as a good? And he decided then at that moment to say no, because friendship is, you cannot sell it on the market. You cannot buy it on the market. So let's sort of skip that. Now later, of course, we introduced public goods we cannot buy and sell on the market, and they became part of the economic discourse. But why not friendship? What's more important to you, your friend or your computer or your refrigerator? What is more important? Now, to most of us, your friendship is, of course, far more important, far more valuable. So why is friendship not part of the economy? I call that part of the social economy. So I think that the ideological battle is that by extending the notion of the economy and to speak of human economies as indeed sites in which we realize things that are important to us, then we also sort of undo this single-minded focus on monetary matters, as if they are all that count. Well, in a literal sense, they are all that count. But what really counts in our own lives is what you do in the human economies. They are far important. And interesting is what follows from how you then look at these financial economies. And indeed also to the work of Hayek and the like. I think it becomes less relevant. I think that we become less interested in that. I think also politics will change. Now politics are very much, that was also your argument, very much informed by this perspective of the financial economy. But I'm talking too long because I would like to get Luigino in on this.
Hello, good evening. It's a bit difficult to get in in the conversation because for technical reason I was able to enter just a few minutes ago. Then also to say something about what economics is after 3 centuries of debate. I think it's a bit difficult to to summarize, but I agree with you, generally speaking. Even though today is very, very hard to disentangle real economy from financial economy, to say that financial economy is not real economy, because 90% of real economy is also financial, and the other way around today, because the ownership of most of the real, what we called real economy, actually is in the hands of very few funds that are very financial. Then, but generally speaking, I agree with you. But I have not much to add, because I prefer to listen to you and maybe to answer if there are some question more specific than this very general.
Thank you, Professor Bruni. We have a queue with 2 questions and about 6 minutes left. So let's see if we can go through them, and then we'll go through the room if there's space. Did you have your? Oh, it was yours. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you both for your talks. My name is John Paul Decay, and I work for a charity called the Ecological Conversion Group. Very pleased that you put the different economies all together. I was just reminded by talking of Adam Smith and the invisible hand, and actually one thing that was apparently not factored into his thinking was the fact that he was a single man and his mother did all of his cleaning for him. I just want to bring this down to people who perhaps are on the breadline. Because people's moral imagination and what's possible is really, really important, especially given the way our planet is being destroyed by the economy. I was just linking the 2 talks. The money changers, Jesus kicking the money changers, if that signals a release from slavery and an access to God's mercy freely, and in the same way, we've got money and urbanization and the history of how this has gone about in our country, meaning that money now actually becomes a means of salvation to most people living in this country in these urban centres. So really this frames what a good human ecology looks like. So I just wanted to sort of bring it to that level of the breadline, even looking at how houses used to be built with allotments for them, so that they would be able to survive and have that means of the good life. But now it all seems to be for efficiency, for economy of scale, of money and efficiency. So really, how do we need to look at this from this angle as well, and help people be able to achieve this good economy and put money at the service of their families and not at the service of the machine which seeks to destroy them further and further. Thank you.
Can you take a note, Arjo? Okay, why don't we do a speed round then? We'll have Edward Skidelsky, and then there were 2 over here, and have the 2 of you each be given a word. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Very quick. Just a quick note on the concept of exchange. I thought both of you in your talks in different ways were trying not so much to reject exchange in favor of some purely altruistic notion of human action, but rather to rescue exchange from a narrowly economic interpretation. So all human relationships involve exchange. I mean, Arjo, with your granddaughter, you were doing something for her, but she was also doing something for you, perhaps not wittingly, but nonetheless. So, you know, all relations involve exchange, only what's exchanged in the relationship needn't necessarily be measurable in monetary terms. I think that's the key insight that I got from both of your talks.
One or two over here, yes, and then we'll have to cut it at that point.
I was just going to ask whether the difference between the financial economy and the human economy comes down to the difference between quantity and qualities, and money as pure quantity on which you can run calculations, because your examples from the human economy strike me as ones upon which you cannot run calculations.
Do you have a question as well? Okay, perfect. So we can have responses from both professors, and after that we invite anyone who wants to join us for evensong in the Blessed Sacrament Chapel just behind the wall here.
You summarized it all. It's indeed switching from quantity to quality. And that also addresses your question about exchange. Do you exchange in quantity? Do you count in money terms? Or do you leave it up to interpretation and deliberation? And in the relationship with my wife, it's all deliberation. When we quantify it, we start fighting, and that doesn't work. And that comes also to the question about that you ask is, see, that's an issue of your, what I call your personal economy, how you make something of your life. I have 4 kids, and I see that they make very different, they choose different directions. One child, the youngest one, seeks a creative life. For her, money is not important at all. We as parents worry about that because she doesn't care. She can care less. At this moment, she made some money with a project of hers, and she immediately gives it away. She doesn't want to have much money. Another child, for him, money is very important. That he spends also a lot of money, but he also earns a lot of money. A very different life. So it is, of course, what kind of life you want to live. And I agree that when you are entering the financial economy, as I keep calling it, the monetary economy, you get easily caught up in the system, so to say. You get easily distracted from what it really amounts to. Come back to these bankers. When I probed them and I asked them about the ideals, this is a banker who ran a major bank, merged with another huge bank. And he was accused of filling his pockets and just being greedy about bonuses. I talked to him, and that was far from what he thought the ideal was. His ideal was a relational bank, where he stands in relationship to other people who want to start up a business and connect them with people who have money to spare. He wanted to be, for him, the ideal was the It's a Wonderful Life, if you know the movie. And it's about being a good banker, to serve people. And the worst period in his life was always the time that bonuses had to be decided on. But he felt caught up in the system. So at this moment, he's trying to change his life and sort of do what he thinks is right. And so to sort of focus on what I think are what I call then the human economies. Because ultimately, that's where you realize the good life, the qualities that count to you in the human economies, not in the other economy. And even if Luigino says, yeah, the other economies, that is sort of, yeah, sure, it's huge. It's dominant right now, at least that we say. But look at your own life. I discovered that my wife, my father, the artists that I talk to, live their life without any awareness of what's going on. They don't care. They don't know how money is created, and it doesn't matter in their life one bit. All the knowledge that I have about the financial economy, they can go do without, and their lives are pretty good, without all that. So you can live a good life without bothering about the financial economy as I have done. And I think the switch is and that's why I am in need of theologians and of artists and sociologists to become anthropologists. I like the work of David Graeber, to become aware of how human economies work. David Graeber, by the way, uses the term too. So, and that will change the conversation radically.
We were going to have Professor Bruni give a reply, but the line has been lost. And so we won't be able to hear a response from him. Yeah, we did our best with the tech we had to try to have him participate, but he wasn't able to make it out from Rome. He had something yesterday and today. But with that said, I wanted to make one quick announcement. There's a speakers dinner later tonight, and we've had, I think, 2, maybe 3 last-minute cancellations. If something like that would interest you to join, I'm going to go to Evensong now, but see me very quickly here, and we can either work it out in the fiscal economy or the human or the humane economy, one of the 3, what kind of arrangement this would be. But I believe we have a few spaces that we can fill for keen participants. And I'll just go here into the cloister after exiting the room. That being said, if you want to join us for a self-sung Evensong, where you are the song, as it were, and you are the singer, please do join us directly there. If you don't want to, and you're coming to the dinner, 7 o'clock upstairs in the library for pre-dinner drinks. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully, and we'll ask you to take your conversations from this part of the chapel at this point. Thank you so much for attending.